but empire brought it to its prominence. See, black images sell. We sell. And we're proving this. And Black Panther has just put the icing on the cake with saying, you know what? We are marketable people. We are viable. We are human beings. We have star power. And black money, this is economics now. We're putting money into this movie. We're making this movie big. We're the ones going to see it 3, 4, 5 times, because I'm not done seeing it. I only saw it once. I'm about to see it 2, 3 more times because it's a homework assignment for me. I want to watch it more often because I'm going to get more out of it, because it's starting discussions, especially amongst African Americans. It's actually starting discussions amongst Africans, amongst Caribbeans, amongst African Americans, amongst Black Latinos, when the ones that actually claim their blackness. Sorry, guys, but some of you guys be like, I know black, I know black, I know black, imposible, I know black, I'm Dominican, I'm Puerto Rican, I know black. Be looking just like me. Be having the same hair. I be touching you like, it's not the same, it's not the same, it's not the same, papi. It's not the same. They try to salsa that shit off. I'd be like, no, it's not the same. I know black. Negro nunca, nunca. I know no, nunca. I know black. I'm like, no, you black. No, no, no. I know black. Dominica. I go, I know, but you're black. No, 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 papi. I know black. No, no, black, black, black. And I have a video with a plantain in my Instagram.
What's up, everybody? You see this yellow banana in my hand? This is called a plantain. For all you Caribbean people, all you Dominican Republic people, Puerto Rico, any of you, if you have this in your food, if you are eating a plantain, you are an African. Do you understand me? I don't care whether you're Spanish African, French African, you are African. Whether you like it or not, whether you try to deny your Africanness, if this is in your diet, okay, a big yellow banana, listen, even a green one, you are an African. So you better recognize, okay? Plantain, banana, dodo, whatever, plátano, tostone, you are a fucking African. So you better respect it, huh? You are black, there's nothing you can do.
What I meant was you have African heritage. There's African blood. Do you know it was mainly Dominican men that said, we're not Africans? I go, did you get the joke? You have African blood in you. First of all, when I was in the Dominican Republic, my friend, white dude said, man, I feel like I'm in Little Africa. I said, look at all these black people, you know? And it was like, look at my Instagram, and I have it. I'm holding a beat up ripe plantain, and I said, if you have this in your diet, you have African, you're an African. All the Spanish people were mad as shit. The Puerto Ricans kind of held their own. They know they had African blood, but a lot of motherfuckers didn't get it. And they said I was separating them from their culture. I'm like, I don't get, what? Anyway.
One thing that's really always bugged me is when people, normally Americans, use the term Mexican when referring to someone's race or ethnicity. Now, don't get me wrong, I am an American, and I do often find myself falling to the trap of using this fallacy, and it's a real shame that that is the vernacular we find ourselves using, as it really doesn't give justice to the reality of the racial situation of Mexico, Mexican Americans, and really all of Latin America. As I've mentioned in a previous video, a lot of people tend to think that all of the Americas south of the United States border is all automatically brown, or that they all share a common origin, which is incredibly inaccurate, and I'm going to explain why in this video. Now, race in Latin America is a very fickle situation. The lines between each particular race are not so cut and dry like they are here in the United States, although admittedly, race can sometimes be pretty confusing here too. Because of the historic system of racial hierarchy imposed in Latin America by the Portuguese and the Spanish, there were always incentives for Latin Americans to identify a certain way or marry a partner of a certain class or race, and this can still be seen to a certain extent in most Latin American countries. This hierarchy used to either raise or lower people on the totem pole of racial subjugation was called the casta system, a slight twist on the South Asian caste system, which was also largely inherent based off class and family origin, and was also used to determine people's role in society. Now, Latin America is normally defined as all of the Spanish and Portuguese countries in North and South America today, although often the term has a very loose definition, and if you ask the average US citizen where Latin America is, they'd probably just guess everywhere south of the US border, which I suppose is understandable. The region today has literally the most racially diverse populations of any place on the planet in today's world, with no racial group making up over 40% of the total population. The first major shift in racial makeup in Latin America started immediately after Christopher Columbus's first landing in the Americas in 1492, and depending on what country you live in today, is either regarded as a courageous explorer or greedy maniac. But either way, the ensuing colonization and mass migration instituted by the Europeans was truly unprecedented, altering the landscape of every region on the continent permanently. Now, even though the majority of Latin American territories would gain independence by the mid-1800s, the utter insanity of the caste system stuck around, greatly influencing politics, culture, and race relations in the new countries, and here's how it worked. Although the majority of Latin American countries had already outlawed slavery pretty early on, there was still a pretty large number of people of African descent in the region, but because of their historic association as slaves, they were placed at or pretty near the bottom of the totem pole. Next up were the Native Americans, or Amerindians, initially making up a huge proportion of the population, but as more and more European settlers began to arrive, and most Amerindians began to assimilate into the growing multiracial population, they slowly found themselves in the minority in their own homeland, and also found themselves around the bottom of the barrel as well. Various groups of mixed-race descent, such as those of half-native, half-European, or half-African, half-European, were normally placed somewhere in between, having more rights than either of the full-blooded groups mentioned earlier, but still not yet at the top. At the top, of course, were Europeans of Spanish blood, who had the most rights, except if they were actually born in the colonies that they lived in, strangely enough, seeing how they placed whites born in Europe to be higher than even pure-blooded whites born in the colonies. Not only did the Spanish love giving people rank in their new racial hierarchy system, but they loved giving names to the new races as well, with those of mixed native and white descent being called mestizo, which really just means mixed in Spanish. Those of mixed mestizo and white descent were known as castizo, mixed mestizo and natives were known as cholo, and it went on like this for literally dozens of different possible racial pairings. Clearly, the Spanish were very transparent that they were on top, and they wanted everyone to know it. This attitude largely stems from the fact that the majority of the Iberian Peninsula, which includes the countries of Spain and Portugal, was occupied by a foreign, non-European, non-Christian people, the North African Moors, for quite a long time, and the European powers had decided to put aside their differences to kick them out of Europe, which possibly led to this attitude of racial superiority. Now that we got that unpleasant history out of the way, let's talk about why modern Latin Americans look the way they do, having such a diverse range in appearance that many members of the same family might even appear to be of different races. Well, there really is no average Latin American look, since there are so many different racial groups as mentioned earlier, with the largest in Spanish Latin America being those of mestizo origin, who are again of mixed Native American and European descent, followed by Europeans, Amerindians, and Africans, although these different categories are rather fluid and it's very difficult to pinpoint people into these groups for a variety of reasons. Although on paper a mestizo is someone of 50% European and 50% Native American DNA, it very rarely comes out like this in reality because of intermixing over the generations, and as such, someone who identifies as mestizo may be anywhere from 40 to 60% European and 40 to 60% native, with studies in Mexico and Chile finding that those mestizos of lower economic standing have on average a higher percentage of native DNA, while those who are richer have on average higher European DNA. It gets even more confusing when you factor in racial admixture from other areas of the planet, such as the huge number of those of Middle Eastern and North African descent in the region, and not many people know this, but Latin America has by far the highest number of people of Middle Eastern ancestry outside of the Middle East itself. That's right, not Europe, not the United States, but countries like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico have the largest numbers of Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians on the planet outside of their homelands. There's also a huge number of East Asians in the region, especially the Japanese and Chinese, with Brazil actually having the highest number of ethnic Japanese outside of Japan, not the United States, and up to 15% of Peru's population has at least some Chinese ancestry, mostly mixed in with their mestizo population. Mestizos from places like Mexico, Panama, Colombia, and Venezuela also might have a small degree of African descent, stemming from the small number of African slaves that were brought to the region. The position of self-identified Europeans in the region is also extremely confusing, considering just who is considered white and mestizo is very blurred at times. Although rates of admixture vary considerably by country and region, studies have shown that the average Latin American white has only around 75 to 85% European ancestry, with that huge missing chunk being either filled in by Amerindian, African, or Middle Eastern DNA. As such, there is a huge overlap of people that could identify either with the white or mestizo label, and this would explain just why estimates of whites in Latin America seems to vary so extremely, with various estimates placing the number of self-identified whites in Mexico at anywhere from 5 to 30%. Yeah, very useful. There are, of course, a very large number of people of full-blooded European descent, mostly in countries in the southern cone of South America, that received a monstrous number of European immigrants, such as Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile. Groups like Middle Easterners, Jews, and Romani may or may not self-identify as European, depending on what country they live in. The situation reaches a crescendo of perplexion when the massive waves of immigrants from Latin America reach the United States, which has had a much more strict and limited definition of white, while having a much more relaxed standard for those identifying as racial minorities. For instance, those of half-black, half-white descent identify solely as African American in the U.S. Census approximately 40% of the time, while those of half-white, half-Native American descent identify solely as Native American almost 70% of the time. For this reason, U.S. Census officials were pretty baffled with these groups of people with racial mixtures they had never seen before in large numbers, and as such decided to do the laziest thing they could possibly do and classify anyone from Spanish or Portuguese America to be Hispanic or Latino, which completely discounts the reality of the situation, especially when you take into account Americans from Spain, who are also lumped in with this Hispanic group, are considered non-white, while the Portuguese are considered white. Although the U.S. Census classifies all Hispanics and Latinos as an ethnic group, which it's not, they also allow them to check off one of the primary races of the United States, such as white, black, Asian, or Native American. But wait, there's no mestizo category, which the bulk of Hispanics identify as back in their home countries. That's okay though, because the U.S. Census also allows for them to check off the multiracial box,